Okay, so we are going to start the class. We were we have started the class, The Living World, and the one lecture we have already completed, right? So what we are going to discuss today is, in the last class we have talked up till biodiversity, right? So characteristics of living, characteristics of non-living, then we have talked about biodiversity, right? We remember that graphs, right? Aru aji ami ki start korim, we will be talking about classification, right? So generally, tinta words to be precise, we are going to talk about classification, taxonomy and systematics. Right? Okay. Hello? Huni paisa no? Okay. So we'll start with the first one, classification. So what is classification? Classification ki hoy? Scientific arrangement of organisms. Aru keneke korim ami classify in a hierarchical order of, or in a order ni likhi pelai, in a hierarchical series of groups on the basis of morphology, evolution and other characters, right? So this is supposed to be a specific definition of the word classification. Right. So we have been talking about the different types of living organisms that are present in the world, no? Biodiversity kotha koi asilo. So the entire world is full with all those or various types of organisms. And now if you want to really know about the organisms that are present in this world, ami ki koribo laibo, eta bhalke study koribo laibo, or we have to classify, right? And once we study about it, ami kot study korim ba keneke study korim, how will you go through it? It's something that is called as classification, right? So when we see the classification of the organism, then we have an idea je hai organism to plant hoy ne animal hoy, if it is a plant to which class of plants does it belong to, similarly if it's an animal to which phylum of animal does it belongs to, right? In order to have a proper idea about that organism or that species that we have identified, so what we need is something called as classification. So classification ki hoy, nothing but a proper arrangement. That proper arrangement, obviously it should be under certain rules and regulations, and so we are using the word ki scientific arrangement. So classification ki hoy, nothing but scientific arrangement. Need for classification, ami classify koribo kyo lage? Why do you have to classify it? Yeah, we can study the organisms, right? Or we can have an idea about the interrelationship between the organisms, right? Jiman organisms ase, hebilak organisms or mazor relation ki. This is also something that is said, or we can come to know about it from classification. Second is various applied biological fields. Applied biological studies বা fields ji kwa are dependent. So classification of upor ki base kori pelai applied biological studies bilak koribo pari. Applied biological fields could, one example could be pharmaceuticals also, right? So dorob eta bonabo lage keneke bonang, kuntu plant extract lom, he plant dal kuntu kingdomot kuntu kingdomot belong kore, kuntu species. So ultimately classification also it helps in for this study of applied biology. Third is it also serves as a base for various bioscience. কোনটো কোনটো হেৰি সুধিছা studies are dependent studies are dependent on it, dependent on classification, right? বুজি পালা? Applied biological studies are dependent on classification. গোটেই statementটো লিখা নাই. Next is classification also serves as the base for various bioscience. Example, biogeography, right, etc. So, jikunu bio-related bostu porhibo lagile, obviously we have to know the organisms, and if you want to know the organisms properly, what will help us is always classification, right? Organism to bhalke classify korile, it will become easy to study. So, these 3 points are something from the GK point of view, right? Nothing to remember as such. Khali, what is classification? Hekhini ami mon rakhibo lagibo, it is nothing but a scientific arrangement, right? Next is, after classification, we have a word called as taxonomy, and then we have systematics. We are going to discuss about taxonomy and systematics, but before starting that, let me tell you, classification, taxonomy or systematics, gutei kita almost have the same meaning, right? So, gutei kita mane ki, to classify the organism, it is almost having the same meaning. So, synonym buliu kobo para. Properly definition wise okuman slightly bele, what is the work of taxonomy? To know the organism properly. What is the work of systematics? Again, to know the organism properly, and similarly classification or kam ki je we have to know the organism properly. Kuntu organism kenukwa dhorone ki kotha ei gutei gita amak help kore, right? Next, we have the word taxonomy, right? What is taxonomy? It is the branch of science which deals with framing the laws and principles of classification, right? So, as I said, classification, taxonomy and systematics almost have the same meaning. Atato definition obviously thakibo no. So, what is taxonomy? It is nothing but a branch of science. Or what is the useful of taxonomy? But taxonomic studies korile no ki hobo? Again, we can know the organism properly, right? So, taxonomy is nothing but a branch of science. What is the work? It helps us to classify, right? Our classification korute obviously jeneke teneke classify koribo nwarim. So, we need to have certain rules and regulations to classify. Talking about rules and regulations, the simplest way we can understand this, binomial nomenclature, I think you all have heard, jikunu eta naam dibo lagile, we have to follow certain rules, right? All of a sudden we cannot give a name to our organism. Kisuman apply, but kisuman rules thakibo that is internationally accepted, and that is the rules that you have to follow. So, taxonomy ki hoy, nothing but a branch of science that helps us to classify organisms on the basis of certain scientific rules and principles. Right? Taxonomy, I mean, kisman kotha monor rakhibo lagibo. For example, the term taxonomy was given by A.P.D. Kendall. So, A2 from entrance point of view, A2 report question ahe. Next is father of taxonomy. Who is considered as a father of taxonomy? Carolus Linnaeus. Yes, father of taxonomy. Either you can remember Carolus Linnaeus or simply Linnaeus monod rakhileo hobo. Next we have Indian father of taxonomy, Santa Pau. a person called as Santa Pau. Next important point is you have to remember the name of a book, Historia Plantarum. What is this? This is a book. It is the first book on taxonomy. Aru, who has written this? Yeah, by Theophrastus. And what do you remember about Theophrastus? He is the father of and student of Aristotle, no? Aristotle. Okay, so taxonomy ki mone rakhim, the term taxonomy was given by father of taxonomy. Indian father upor generally iman questions aha nai. Tothapi next is the first book on taxonomy. Next, types of taxonomy. There are two types of taxonomy. One is called as classical taxonomy and the other is called as modern taxonomy, right? So bahut taxonomy branches bilak bahut ase, kintu broadly if you want to divide taxonomy, it has been divided into two types. Ki asile? Classical and modern, right? So what is classical taxonomy? Classical word to hunile, the word that you need to remember or the statement that you need to remember is classical is something that is considered to be primitive. Agor dinot keneke classify korisil ba what was the basis for classification? So primitive studies too, that primitiveness is considered to be classical. So classical word to hunile jehetu primitive study, and what we need to remember is primitive study about the organisms has always been conducted on the basis of morphological features only. Eta organism dekha pam, he organism to morphologically bahiror pra ami kenekai so bhitor pra janibo lagile, that is something called as anatomy, right? Our bahiror pra organism to dekhat kenuka, jeti only on the basis of morphology we try to classify that organism, that is what is called as classical taxonomy. So classical taxonomy ki hoy based on observable morphological characters only. Observable morphological characters only. So what we were saying is taxonomic studies kiyo koribo lage, so that we can classify that organism properly. Aru he classify korute jedi okol morphological features kini he sao ami, and on that basis we try to classify, that type of a classification would be called as classical. Next is modern. Modern taxonomy ki hoy, the various characters are taken into consideration. Classical ot jeneke okol morphology basis to lua hoy, kintu modern ot ki hoy morphology ke uporiu aru bahut bostu consider kora hoy. And what are the things it deals with? Deals with external and internal features, right? It also deals with developmental process, and ecological role of the organism, right? So jedi okol morphology consider kori prai classify kora hoy, tetial tak ami ki buli kom classical taxonomy buli kom. Jedi bahut characters consider kori prai ami classify koribo bisarisu, that is what is called as modern taxonomy. And what are the characters that we are considering in a modern classification is we are talking about the morphology, and so we have written the word ki external characters. Ami eta organism sam tar external characters kini ami study korim, that is what is called as morphology. Coming to internal features means what? We are taking into consideration the anatomy of the organism also, right? Developmental process is nothing but physiology, right? Keneke ki korise, what are the activities, what are the reactions that are going inside the organism. So morphology consider korisu, anatomy consider korisu, aru physiology consider korisu, and lastly we are considering the ecological role of the organism. Now ecology ki hoy, what is ecology? It is nothing but a study. Balance between the environment. One way of saying the statement is ecology ki hoy. It is nothing but the study of the biotic and abiotic factors of the organism. হয় এটা অৰ্গানিজম থাকিব অৰ্গানিজম ইজ অবভিয়াছলি দ্য লিভিং সেই লিভিং অৰ্গানিজমটোৰ লগত যিবোৰ নন লিভিং ফেক্টৰ্ছ এছ'চিয়েটেড হৈ আছে গোটেইখিনি যদি একেলগে ষ্টাডি কৰা দ্যাট ইজ হোৱাট ইজ কল্ড এজ ecology, right? So similarly, ecological role of the organism, jikunu eta living organism or especially from the plant point of view, if you are talking about it, so plant point of view boli nohoy, plant e hok ba animal e hok, jikunu eta organism or eta specific ecological role thake. So ecological role mane ki? So when we talk about ecology, there are three terms that we remember, no? Ki asile? Producers, consumers, aru decomposers. So kisuman organisms will act as a producer, so that is its ecological role. Kisuman will act as a consumer, so hey animal ba hey organism to ecological role ki that it is a consumer. Kisuman organisms will play the function of decomposing, so hey organism to ecological role ki the decomposition, right? So this is what we understand by ecological role of the organism. Is the point understood? Modern classification, yes, we are taking into consideration morphology, anatomy, physiology and also ecology. Now there is a difference between ecological study and evolutionary study. Hoy ne? Ecology or evolution duita meaning to ekei nohoy, duita beleg beleg hoy nohoy, right? So here what we are dealing is ecological studies and not evolutionary studies. This is something that you need to remember. Right? Evolution mane ki we are talking about the organism to father ki asile forefathers ki asile hey tree to ba hey relation to jodi ami study koru tak ami ki boli kom evolution or phylogeny, right? So in this case we are considering ecological and not evolutionary. Buji palu? Okay, so classical taxonomy only on morphology, modern taxonomy based on morphology, anatomy, physiology and also ecological role. Next, we have elements of taxonomy. Elements of taxonomy. So, what are the elements of taxonomy? Characterization. Characterization, identification, nomenclature, and classification. Right? Means what? Jikunu eta notun organism, if you discover, what you will do first, you will study its characters, and after studying its characters, you will try to identify. The simplest step of identifying is either plant ne animal. Jikunu eta bostu dekhiso, he first step to ami kisman bostu sai pelai. We can differentiate either it is a plant or animal. So we see the characters, we try to identify. Once it has been identified, say etu bostu plant hoy ba etu bostu animal hoy. Jodi identify hoy gol, tar pisot what we try to do is we try to put a particular name to that, and while giving a name, obviously binomial nomenclature hobo laibo, tetia hale hey name naam to ki hobo, it will be accepted by everyone, right? And ultimately we'll try to classify. All of agote je ami koisilu je what is classification ba classification, taxonomy and the word systematics can be used in a synonym way, right? So classification o ki hoy, taxonomy at a part. Is the point understood? Yate at a question ahe. Ami jete elements bilak likhisu, elements bilak likhute ami first thought ki likhisu characterization, next identification, next nomenclature, next classification. Question 2 ahise that what is the first step of taxonomy? So first step of taxonomy is a question to ahe. In that case, if you are going to write characterization as the first step of taxonomy, the answer would be wrong. Tat ami ki monot rakhibo laibo, identification is always the first step of taxonomy, and this is something that's very commonly asked, right? So A2 question to mon koriba aru A here characterization. So books or mote amak ki likha ase the first characterization, kintu scientifically ami ki koru je prothomote jete organism to dekhiba tumi identify he koriba, hoy na hoy goi pai tumi prothomote identify koriba je plant ne animal, ami to characters porhibole arambho nokoru. So from a question point of view, what we write question to khoda hetu ahe, what is the first step of taxonomy? The first step of taxonomy is identification, right? Science or mote first thought to be ki kora je tumi prothomote identify kora, tar pisothe beleg steps bilak kora. Is the point understood? Okay, so these are certain things about taxonomy that you have to remember. Ki monot rakhilo, so what is taxonomy? We have talked about father of taxonomy. Indian father of taxonomy, the book, the types of taxonomy are the elements of taxonomy. Now we come to another word that is called as systematics. Systematics. What is systematics? It is a study that attempts to describe name, recognize and arrange the organisms. Right? So, how does the statement goes like? The statement is something like this. What is systematics? It is nothing but a study. Or a study to ki kore? It tries to describe, name, recognize and arrange the organism. A gute gita word milai phalai. What we can say is, what is systematics? It's something that helps in classification. Describe korise, mane ki ultimately classify koribole describe korise, naam dise, recognize korise, arrange korise. This is nothing but classification. This is the reason why taxonomy, systematics and classification almost have the same meaning, right? So systematics are through ami ki koru, we try to classify the organisms. And why we need to classify the organism? To have a proper idea about the organisms, right? Next is, yate ki point monot rakhibo laibo, eta question ahe, the term systematics, but the word systematics has been taken from, the word systematics has been taken from the Latin word, ki asile, systema. Yeah. And what we understand by systema? Scientific arrangement, no? Scientific or proper arrangement of the organisms is called as systema. So, ekhini pra question kiya hai that you need to remember the word Latin, right? And you need to remember the word systema. So, the word systematics has come from the word systema. Systema word to kuntu language likha hasil, it is from Latin. So, ei duta bostu will remember. And the word was first used by Linnaeus, right? Next, systematics or আকৌ দুটা টাইপ আছে যেনেকৈ টেক্সনমি দুটা টাইপ আছিলে সিস্টেমেটিক্সৰো দুটা টাইপ আছে এটা হ'ল ক্লাসিক্যাল সিস্টেমেটিক্স আৰু এটা হ'ল this time we are not going to use the word modern, instead new systematics, right? Classical is a word that we have got while we were talking about taxonomy also, no? Taxonomy eta classical taxonomy ase aru eta modern taxonomy ase. Similarly, systematics eta classical systematics ase aru eta new systematics ase. Now I think we understand what is the meaning of classical. By classical boli ketia kom jetia the classification is based only on morphological features, right? So in this case also jedi okol morphological features based on morphological features, right? Next, basic unit of classification ki asile? Basic unit of classification according to classical systematics is species. And you have to remember some workers, some scientists who have done their work in classical systematics, Aristotle, then Linnaeus, etc. Right? So classical taxonomy, I mean, duta point monot rakhibo laibo. First is it is based on morphological features only. Next is basic unit of classification is always species. Workers, Aristotle aru Linnaeus, and who has given the name systematics? Olof agote ami likhisu, right? Next is new systematics, it is based on all characters. Right? Yate ki likhisilo based on only morphology. Yate ki likhiso based on all characters. What we understand by this word, all characters, means which characters are we talking about? Kunbilak characters. All characters boli kole ki buji pam? We are talking about morphology. We are talking about anatomy, physiology, ecology, and tar logote aru eta consider kora hoy, that is called as phylogeny. If you have noticed, systematics or taxonomy almost have the same meaning. Tothapi tahator majot eta difference ase. Difference to ki je eta study e phylogeny consider nokore ar eta study e phylogeny consider kore. Now phylogeny mane, what is phylogeny? The study of the evolutionary history of organism is called as phylogeny, right? So taxonomical jetia studies yeah, which one? Phylogeny. Okay, so okay, what I was saying is that there is a difference between taxonomy and systematics. Iman deri ami ki koi aso je classification, taxonomy, systematics almost have the same meaning. Kintu tothapiu systematic study aru taxonomic study duitar major eta basic difference ase. Difference to ki je jetia eta bostu taxonomically study kora tetia hole ami kisman characters consider koru. Ki characters asile? Morphology, anatomy, physiology and ecology. Kintu systematically jetia ami classify koru, then we take all those characters and together with that we also consider the phylogeny of the organism. Phylogeny mane? Oh, phylogeny to addition. So taxonomy or systematics are basic difference hoy je etat phylogeny consider kora hoy aru etat phylogeny consider kora no hoy. Is the point understood? Our phylogeny mane ki? We are talking about the evolution of the species, right? So yate ma gute characters likha nai. So alop pisot likhi dim based on all characters. All characters means all the characters of taxonomy together with that phylogeny, right? Next is basic unit. Basic unit of classification. Yate ki asile basic unit to species. Eta species or upor he tahate study to korisile. Yate basic unit of classification ki, it is no population. Right? Tamane swa. Yate jite all characters of kotha koisu no. Morpho thakibo, anatomy thakibo. Next is physiology thakibo. Ecology thakibo aru ki thakibo phylogeny, right? Phylogeny mane evolution. Evolution or study koribo lagile ami ki sao je aru eta bostu ki je juntu organism ase he organism to father kun asile, forefather kun asile, teor ki asile, কৰ পৰা originate korise, that is what is called as phylogeny. Aru plus yate ami iman bor organisms or aru eta bostu sao, that is what is called as affinity. Ami olop pisot likhim he bostu to. Basic unit of classification is population. Mane eta group or study kore. It is not one species that we are talking about. Population hobo lagile ki hobo? Many species ba bahut gita organism. If you are talking about human beings as a species, ejon jodi thake, he is a single individual, right? Bahut bor human beings jodi ekelage thake, they will form a population. I think we understand what a population is, right? Many number to jodi besi hoy. Subspecies is also a basic unit, kintu yate ami okol species consider karon. Karon subspecies to species of ke aru tolot no. It is a rank that is below the species, right? Kintu at that time when the classification was done, they did not consider the subspecies. Iman detailed classification hekini samoyt hoy nasile, right? It gradually has subspecies ba beleg beleg ami taxa pai goi asu, right? Kintu at that time species was the basic. Now also species is the basic unit, but species or tolotu aru kisuman species mane categories ase. Kintu tetia ki asile? Species to consider korisile as a lowest category, and so study was based on species itself, right? Aru yate ki kore je yate jehetu bahut bor eta group or study kore, so species or study nokori pelai population of that species or kore, right? Eta species or kora aru eta species or study aru population of a species or study major duita relation to ba duita eta difference thakibo na thake. Tumi eta study korisa about one organism, aru eta study korisa about a group of same organism. Maybe eta manuhor kotha porisa aru eta group of people or kotha porisa. Duita study major difference thakibo na thake. And what would the difference be? And what would be the difference? Different. No. So no, we are talking about, maybe we are talking about the same species. Let's not go for species and population. Moi ki koiso je tumi duta study korise, eta study eta individual consider korise. Your topic of study is just one human being, right? Aru eta studied a group of human beings, maybe 4 human beings together, right? Eta studied eta manhor kotha porise, eta study tumi 4 jon manhor kotha porisa. Now ei duita study re kisuman similarities thakibo aru kisuman dissimilarity, I mean kiba kon okoman to obviously dissimilar hoboi. What is the dissimilarity? Similarity ki hobo je if okay, characteristics hobo pare kintu in a broader sense jodi tumi koa human beings will have 2 legs, 4 human beings will also have 2 legs each, right? So teneke kisuman to same থাকিব ন, কিন্তু বেসিক পয়েন্ট অফ ডিফারেন্স জানা কি হ'ব, যেতিয়া এটা গ্ৰুপৰ কথা পঢ়া তেতিয়া হলে আমি কি পঢ়িম জানা, তাহাতৰ ৰিলেশন amongst their organisms, সেই চাৰিটা মানুহৰ মাজত ৰিলেশনটো কি, ৰিলেশন ইজ সামথিং দ্যাট উই ষ্টাডি, ৰাইট? অকলে পঢ়িলে তাৰ ৰিলেশনটো পঢ়াটো একো কথা নাই, বিকজ হি ইজ অল এলোন। কিন্তু চাৰিটা মানুহৰ যদি একেলগে পঢ়ি আছা, এজন মানুহেনো সিজন মানুহৰ লগত what is the relation they are sharing, right? What is the relation they are having amongst 4 of them together? So what I want to say is, jetia eta population ba groupor study eta kora, tetia relation is also something that we consider. We are not using the word relation here, we would be using a word called as affinity. Juntu bost relation to consider kora hoy kiyo kare, so tumi eta 4টা মানুহ একেলগে আছা, তাহাতৰ মাজত কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ ৰিলেশন আছে, কোঅপাৰেটিভ আছে নে কি আছে, কম্পিটিটিভ আছে নে কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ? ইফ ইট ইজ কম্পিটিটিভ, অবভিয়াসলি কাজিয়া পেছাল লাগিব, লাগি পেলাই সাৰ্ভাইভেল অফ দ্য ফিটেষ্ট হ'ব। এণ্ড ইফ ইট ইজ কোঅপাৰেটিভ, তাহাঁতে একেলগে থাকিব এণ্ড দেয়াৰ পপুলেশ্যন উইল ইনক্ৰিজ, ৰাইট? ইয়া এক্সাক্টলি। চ' সেই ৰিলেশ্যনটো আমি জানিব লাগিব যে আছে, ঠিক আছে, কিন্তু কি ৰিলেশ্যনত আছে, পজিটিভ ৰিয়াকশ্যনছ অৰ ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যনছ নে নেগেটিভ ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যনছ, ৰাইট? চ' দ্যাট ইজ দ্য ৰিজন ৱাই উই ষ্টাডি দ্য ৰিলেশ্যন। পজিটিভ বা নেগেটিভ থাকিব ন ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যনছ বিলাক, আৰু পজিটিভ নেগেটিভ ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যনছ অফ বেষ্ট এক্সাম্পল কি, নেগেটিভ ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যন যদি কওঁ উই আৰ টকিং এবাউট কম্পিটিশ্যন, আৰু যদি পজিটিভ ইণ্টাৰেকশ্যনছৰ কথা কওঁ উই আৰ টকিং এবাউট কি, ইন টাৰ্মছ অফ লোৱাৰ অৰ্গেনিজমছ উই কুড বি টকিং এবাউট মিউচুৱেলিজম অলছ', ৰাইট? মিউচুৱেল ৰিলেশ্যনত থাকিব, ৰাইট? যদি কম্পিটিটিভ হৈ যায় তেতিয়াহ'লে কি হ'ব, এক্সক্লুশ্যন অফ দ্য স্পিচিজো হৈ যাব পাৰে নে নোৱাৰে? কাজিয়া চাজিয়া লাগি গোটেইকেইটা মানুহ বোলে মৰি থাকিলে, right? So তেতিয়াহ'লে obviously combination হৈ যাব, right? So ইয়াতে the basic thing is, ইয়াতে অকল এটা স্পিচিজৰ কথা পঢ়িছিলে, ইয়াতে পপুলেশ্যনৰ কথা পঢ়িছে। যিহেতু population was the basis of study, we are considering the affinity or the interrelationship between the organisms also, right? Next, eke, it's the same meaning, right? The unit of classification আমি দিলো, ইয়াতে আৰু এটা কি জানিব লাগে, who has given the term? The term was given by, new systematics term to কোনে দিছে, জুলিয়ান হাক্সলে। এটোৰ ওপৰত বহুত কোৱেশ্চন আহে, মানে এতিয়ালৈকে আহিছে। The term new systematics was given by, right? Next, classical আৰু new systematics er egita point of difference. Now we'll be talking about elements of systematics. যেনেকৈ আমি elements of taxonomy পঢ়িছিলোঁ অলপ আগতে, এতিয়া কি হ'ব, elements of systematics. So elements of systematics মই কি কৈছিলোঁ, taxonomy নিচিনাই হ'ব। So obviously characterization, identification, nomenclature, classification, and lastly we have the word affinity, right? So taxonomy logot almost same, khali eta point of difference, that is here they will consider the affinity or the relationship between the organisms. Relationship between the organisms includes phylogeny also, right? So as a result ami ki kobo paru, systematics is taxonomy with phylogeny. A statement to buzi paisu nai swa. What is systematics? Systematics is nothing but taxonomy together with phylogeny. Jedi phylogeny consider kora hoy tetihale he study to ami ki buli kom systematics buli aru jedi phylogeny consider kora no hoy tetihale he study to ami ki buli kom taxonomy buli. Is the point understood? Okay, now since we are talking about phylogeny, phylogeny is evolution. Now we understand phylogeny logot aru eta word ase that is called as ontogeny. Ki asile শুনিছানে কোনখিনি ক্লিয়াৰ হোৱা নাই নেকি বস্তুটো phylogeny and ontogeny ontogeny okay exactly evolution history exactly life history of an organism right tak ami ki boli kom ontogeny aru phylogeny ki hoy evolutionary history of the organism evolutionary history of the organism right jehetu ami phylogeny kotha koi aso he karone etu word we have to remember that is called as ontogeny. So what is the difference? Okol life history is ontogeny aru jodi evolution consider kor that is called as phylogeny right kiba doubts ase liki now we understand. Okay, so up till now what we have discussed is we have talked about the words classification, taxonomy or systematics. Both of them or three of the words will have the same meaning, okoman difference. Tar bhitor systematics বা new systematics is considered to be the most advanced type of study karon yate protecto character consider kora hoy together with that phylogeny is considered. Etia aru simple meaning of jedi or if you want to like just basically know the taxonomy or systematics or difference ki instead of remembering all these definitions that are given you in NCERT ki monot rakhibo para je systematics ki hoy nothing but a type of classification by arrangement taxonomy ki hoy nothing but a type of arrangement. Now how can we understand this? Suppose tumar the room where you live thik ase tumar roomot ki ase ekhon bisona ase aru he bisona khonot tumar gutei kapurbur tate tumi pelai thoi disa your mother comes to your house and then tells you je tumi ei kapur khini jikhini tumi beya kori thoi disa arrange kori rakha properly right right so I'm just giving an example so ma ahi belai ki kole je tumi kapur khini thik kori thua etia kapur khini tumi arrange koriba that also depends on je tumi bhalke arrange koriba ne ene arrange koriba তাৰমানে what you can do is গুটে বিছনাৰ কাপোৰখিনি নি পেলাই তোমাৰ যেটো কাবাৰ্ড আছে কাবাৰ্ডত তুমি থৈ দিব পাৰা in that way the bed will look clean হয় না শুনিছা hello okay so in that case কি হ'ব যে গুটে কাপোৰখিনি নি পেলাই তুমি যদি কাবাৰ্ডত থৈ দিয়া হেতু এটা arrangement কিন্তু তুমি গুটে কাপোৰখিনি যদি স্পেসিফিকলি ধৰা শাৰ্টৰ জেগাত শাৰ্ট থোৱা জিন্সৰ জেগাত জিন্স থোৱা properly arrange কৰা হেতু এটা arrangement right so in other words properly arrange কৰাটোক আমি কি বুলি কওঁ systematics বুলি কওঁ right আৰু একদম properly arrange নকৰাটোক আমি কি বুলি কওঁ taxonomy বুলি কওঁ right আৰু properly যদি arrange কৰা তেতিয়ালে that is called as systematics so here we have an idea about systematics আৰু taxonomy Now classification or dutaman extra point types of classification broadly classification are of three types artificial natural yeah ontology systematics include hobo karon systematics sob bostu include hoy tar uporot phylogeny include hoy right okay talking about types of classification artificial natural or phylogenetic ei tinta classification or details kini amar biological classification othe ase so we will be talking about it at that time just to have an idea jehetu classification porisu three types of classification ase artificial natural and phylogenetic out of this সবতছে ancient type of classification কোনটো artificial আর সবতছে modern বা latest classification that is accepted is always phylogenetic. Artificial classification, which classification would be considered as an artificial classification? Eta classification of artificial classification ketia kom? Only, yeah, you have to remember the word only, right? Okol jodi morphology report kore, that is called as tumar artificial, no? Morphological characters only. Similarly, natural type of classification ki hoy, you take all the characters into consideration except phylogeny. Except phylogeny. Our phylogenetic classification, now we understand this is the most accepted one and this is the most useful, right? Artificial classification is almost like classical classification. All morphological characters or basis of the kora hoy, right? Primitive studies bilakot jimanbor agor scientists bilak asile sobe ki korisile okol morphological studies er upor he classification kon kori thoisile, and so that is considered as an artificial classification, right? Our natural ki all the characters except phylogeny. Our phylogeny is considered kora hol for classification. That classification was said to be ki phylogenetic. Our most accepted ki je phylogenetic classification is most accepted. Next, we have to talk about useful in classification. Classification বা classify koribo lagile kiba kibi bostu help kore. Useful in classification. First is characters, and second is a word called as homology, right? So jikono eta bostu classify koribo hole we need to know about the characters of the organism. So characters is supposed to be the keystone for classification, right? Remember the word keystone, right? So characters e amar classification help kore ba characters study e characters is supposed to be the keystone of classification. Talking about characters, there might be three types of characters. Ki eta hol ancestral characters, kisuman characters ok ami ki boli kau derived characters, আর কিছুমান ক্যারেক্টারক আমি কি বুলি কওঁ কনজারভেটিভ ক্যারেক্টার্স. সো যিকোনো এটা অর্গানিজম যেটা আমি স্টাডি কৰিছো তাৰ ক্যারেক্টার্স বিলাক আমি স্টাডি কৰো, এন্ড ক্যারেক্টার্স হ্যাজ বিন ক্লাসিফাইড আন্ডার থ্রি ক্যাটেগরিজ, দ্যাট ইজ ancestral, derived or conservative. Now what we understand by ancestral, যে কিছুমান characters organism to from the time of birth থাকে, and that is what is called as ancestral characters. And out of these characters, some of the characters might be vestigial also. Vestigial word to janone? What is vestigial? Yeah, that has become extinct or extinct nokoleo or ba hey character to ase kintu hey character to kono kam nai, it does not have any function. Yeah, rudimentary. Yeah, appendix, that is the best example of a vestigial organ, right? So organism eta kisuman characters thakibo, tar bhitor kisuman characters from the time of birth thakibo, hey characters bilak functional o hobo pare, non functional o hobo pare, and those characters would be called as what? Ancestral, right? Ancestral character. Next we have something called as derived character. Derived, as the name suggests, means what? The organism to lifespan, life cycle to on the way it progresses to in its life cycle, kisuman characters nije adapt kore, maybe because of the environmental condition that they stay, right? So junpila conditions start or develop kore because of some other factors like environment, tak ami ki boli kau derived. What could be the best example of a derived character? Giraffe neck, hetu to eta controversial bostu, kan Griffith said that, kintu it has not been proved, no, hetu to wrong boli prove kora hoise. Derived characters, let's not go into primitive studies. What we will be talking about is, if you consider two person, one person staying in the hills and the other person staying in the plains, dujon manu ase, same species, no, human beings, এজন হিউমেন বিং ষ্টেজ ইন দ্য প্লেইনছ এণ্ড এজন হিউমেন বিং ষ্টেজ ইন দ্য হিলছ চ' মৰ্ফলজিকেলি অকণমান ফিচাৰ্ছ আমি বেলেগ দেখা পাম নে নাপাম or maybe we can take the example of dogs also one dog staying in the plain and one dog staying in the hills duita dogor mazot অকণমান morphological features change hobo nohoy right for no I'm not talking about the breeds right suppose exactly fluffy hobo অকমান শকত হ'ব হয় ন প্লেইনছত থকা ডগটো হেয়াৰ ফেক্টৰটো বেছি নাথাকিব কাৰণ তাহাঁতক ইমান দৰকাৰেই নাই বিকজ দ্য এনভাইৰনমেণ্ট ইজ হট ইনাফ ৰাইট কোল্ড এৰিয়াজত থাকিলে তাহাঁতৰ চ' সেইবিলাক কেৰেক্টাৰ্ছ বিকজ অফ কি এনভাইৰনমেণ্টেল কণ্ডিশ্যন দ্যাট দে আৰ ষ্টেয়িং ইট সেইটো কাৰণে ডেভেলপ কৰিছে আৰু সেইবিলাক কেৰেক্টাৰ্ছক আমি কি বুলি ক'ম ডিৰাইভ এজ ফাৰ এজ হিউমেন বিংছ আৰ কনচাৰ্ণ এজন মানুহ দ্য পাৰ্চন লিভিং ইন দ্য হিলছ জেনেৰেলি দে আৰ কনচিডাৰ্ড টু বি শ্বৰ্ট right as compared to the person living in the plains plus if you are talking about the leg muscles no tahator ki hoy tahator bur shorter hoy ihotor bur the plains or bilak okman comparatively they are taller right then we have so many differences that are because of the environment where they are staying right ami as manu potokke dekhile gom pao especially if you are considering a person that lives in Shillong গুৱাহাটীৰ মানুহ এজন আৰু শিলঙৰ মানুহ এজন অকমান হলেও ডিফাৰেন্স আছে নাই স্পেশালি শিলঙত কি হৈছে আমি শৰ্টাৰ হাইট দেখিছো নাই right so these raceor karone to ki hoy mane actually ki hoy bostu to first to environment or karone hoise juntu niki tumar from generations after generation is has been carried tapso gene modification obviously hoy goise jiman generations par hoise jiman tahator reproduction hoise tetiale it has been carried through generations after generations kintu first sabole kole human beings buli kole characters to sob ekei hobo lagisile right so according to the environment also okuman change hoy our human beings is a big study let's talk about dogs could be seen easily and the basic point of difference is about the presence and absence of hair right okay so hebilakok ami ki boli kom derived characters next is the third type of a character that is called as conservative what we understand by the meaning conservative mane ki jun bilak strict যোনবিলাক বেছি চেঞ্জ নহয় তাক আমি কি বুলি কওঁ কনজাৰভেটিভ বুলি কওঁ ৰাইট সো যিকোনো অৰ্গানিজমে কিছুমান অৰ্গানিজমৰ কি হয় যে কিছুমান বেসিক ক্যাৰেক্টাৰ্স জেনাৰেশনস আফটাৰ জেনাৰেশন বাট উইথ ইভলিউশন অলসো বেছি চেঞ্জ নহয় that is what is called as conservatory characters or মই কি লিখিছো কনজাৰভেশন লিখিছো ন derived characters and conservatory not conservation sorry conservatory characters right ba conservative boli likhibo para conservative characters means what junbilaki ke generally change no hoy what is the example is the dental feature human beings has been evolved from corpora evolved hua boli koise apes or pra right so apes or jonto evolution or amar jonto evolution right if you study about the dental features between a chimpanzee and a human being you will see almost the same right so kisuman bostu almost eke thake and that is what is called as conservative characters right so ultimately what we know classification on kune help kore characters e help kore characters are considered to be the keystone of classification kenuka dhorono characters thake three types of characters thake right next is something called as homology also helps in classification যিকোনো অৰ্গানিজম এটা ক্লাসিফাই কৰিব লাগিলে বা তাৰ ষ্টাডি কৰিব লাগিলে homology helps us have you heard about the word homology and analogy homologous obviously you all have heard homologous organ analogous organ শুনিছা ন homologous organs কি বস্তু জুনে homology দেখায় analogous organ কি হয় জুনে analogy দেখায় now what is the difference between homology and analogy exactly same ancestral you have to talk about this first origin right tahator origin to eke tarpsot ki kola tumi same structure but different function right so আমি যেহেতু ক্লাসিফিকেশন পঢ়ি আছো, the most important point is we are talking about its origin, right? So eta organism or jodi origin to ami gom pao, then it is easy to classify, and that study ancestral origin, same structure but different function, this is what is called as homology. Homology to the example dia ase NCERT bookot. Example is common ancestry thaka ba common origin thaka kisuman examples dia ase jeneke wings of birds, patagium of bats, foreleg of a horse, forearm of humans, and flipper of seal. Right? So we are giving some examples in a flipper of seal, wings of birds, patagium, foreleg, forearm. Out of this, at least wings of birds, we understand. Flipper of a seal, I think we understand, no? A flat portion too. Next is, we have a word called as patagium. Patagium mane ki? Ekdam simple meaning wings of bats. Yeah. So ebilak jodi examples ami consider koru, what we have seen is all these examples will have the same origin. Tahatar origin ba ancestral origin is the same. They will have the same structure. Suppose we are considering the foreleg of a horse and forearm of a human being. As far as the bones are present, that origin ba tar structure to almost the same. Jedi tar dudal koru koru har ase, yato koru koru dudal thakibo, right? So structure to eke hobo, kintu function to beleg hobo. So ultimately, enukwa dhoroner example is called as homologous study, and jedi homology hoy aru jedi ami ancestry to gom pao, tetia hole amar classification or karone easy hoi jay. Right? So this is the reason why we say homology helps in classification. Homology helps in classification. Kiho karone it helps in classification? Because with the study of this homology, we can know about the ancestry. Right? Yate aru eta point janibo lagibo je homology shows divergent evolution. Eta ase word convergent aru eta ase word divergent. Convergent aru divergent mane eta pointer loke jodi khumai aise aise, that is convergent, aru jodi etar pra ulai joa dekhaise, that is called as divergent. From the diagram itself, ami arrowhead gidal jehetu bahirole disu, what is the diagram that is indicating? Obviously a divergent structure, right? So what we have to remember is homology shows ki divergent evolution. Ekeloke bujisu? So ei duta factor e amak ki kore classification or help kore. So now since we are talking about homology, we have to talk about analogy also. Analogy definition to ki hobo? What would be the definition of analogy now? What about the origin? Different hoy, because we are talking it from classification point of view, no? Hekarone ami origin word to monot rakhibo lagibo. Homology ki asle same origin, analogy ki hobo different origin. So jetia jikono examples kisuman no aru he examples bilakor jedi origin to beleg beleg hoy, tetia hole amar classification koribole easy hobo ne tan hobo? Obviously difficult hobo, because we do not know the origin. Right? So ultimately what we can conclude is homology always helps in classification, whereas analogy always confuses classification. Right? Right? So homology ki kore? Homology helps aru analogy confuses. Right? Another point that we have discussed is homology ki dekhay? Divergent evolution dekhay, analogy convergent evolution dekhay. Iman details nalage, convergent upor question aha nai, thapi just to know convergent evolution dekha pai. Ekhin loke ami buji palu ne? Right? Okay. ঠিক আছে. So ইয়াৰ পিছৰ টপিকটো আমি কি কৰিম? We will be talking about nomenclature. Right? So whenever we talk about nomenclature, what we talk about or what we remember is a word called as binomial nomenclature, no? Kinda okol binomial nomenclature nai, there are different types of nomenclature also that we need to know. Okay, first coming to nomenclature, what is nomenclature? Naming. Yeah, naming of an organism is called as, is called as nomenclature. As far as names are concerned, names could be of two types, no? Ki naam thakibo pare, tomar eta ghor matar naam thake aru eta dhal naam thake, no? So we have a term vernacular name aru eta ki naam scientific name, right? So jetia scientific name. So when we are talking about naming an organism, the names could be vernacular or it could be scientific. What is the difference between a vernacular name and a scientific name? Yeah, vernacular name to ki hobo, local hobo, no? At a local area, local people, they are giving the name, and that name is confined to a local area. Okol at a specific area he jane. But the scientific name is given on the basis of, it is universally accepted. And why is it universally accepted? Because it is always on the basis of some scientific rules and regulations, right? Another point of difference is vernacular name can keep on changing, but scientific name ketiao change na hoy. Ebar diar pisot generally hetu bostu change na hoy, right? Next, types of nomenclature. We have three types: polynomial nomenclature, trinomial, aru binomial. Yar bitorte sobotse accepted kuntu, obviously kuntu. It is always the binomial nomenclature that has been accepted, no? Right? Next is coming to the first one, polynomial. Binomial mane ki? If a name contains two parts, it is called as binomial. Similarly, trinomial ki hobo je tinta part thakibo. Aru polynomial, more than 3 parts would be called as a polynomial. So kisuman information about polynomial you need to know that this type of a nomenclature was used before 1750, iman purana. Second is, this name contains or the names are given on morphological information. Given on morphological information, right? Morphological information mane how does it look, could grow korise, kenekwa dhornor flowers bila kenekwa ase, etc. etc. He jikhini ami just basically dekha paiso hetur upor jene naam tu diye, that is called as polynomial. Yate just eta example that you have to know is eta plant that is called as caryophyllum. Now it is called as caryophyllum. Polynomial tar naam tu ki asile? Caryophyllum saxatilis folis gramineus umbellitis corymbes. So we have just given an example of a plant called as caryophyllum species, but we have different species. Now we know caryophyllum to bahe plant to binomially represent kore, and binomially represent korile tar matro duta part thakibo, eta hol generic part aru eta hol specific part, right? Kintu polynomial tar naam eta asile jontu neki bahut dighol and it contains of more than 3 letters, no? This is what is called as polynomial. Yar naam tu ki asile? Caryophyllum saxatilis folis gramineus umbellitis aru corymbes, and each part of the name had to say something about the morphology of that plant. Ki koisile? The name of the plant is caryophyllum. It grew in rocky area. পাথৰ থকা জেগাত গ্ৰো কৰিছিলে হেকাৰণে সাক্সাটেলিস নামটোত the habitat it grew হেতুৰ ইনফৰমেশন টু দিয়া আছে যেনেকে সাউথৰ ৰজাবিলাকক কি কৰিছিল বহুত নামবিলাক বহুত দীঘল হয় নহয় দেউতাকৰ নাম দিয়ে জেগাৰ কোনখন দেশৰ ৰজা হেতুৰ দিয়ে দীঘলীয়া কৰি কৰি গৈ থাকে no the name indicates many informations together similarly such type of a name also gives you lot of informations it talks about the plant it talks about the area that is growing it grows in a rocky substratum foliage gramineous means what gramineous has come from the word gramine right a plant dal kenekwa gramine ami gramine hunisane examples of gramine rice wheat etc these are examples of gramine right so rice plant or wheat plant jo jenekwa tahor gramine tenekwa type dekha so it is called as gramineous next we have umbellites and corymbes umbellites are corymbes on the basis of what on the basis of inflorescence of the plant do you remember inflorescence tumalke morphology porhisa inflorescence inflorescence or অকমান বেছি ডিটেইলস যদি নাই পঢ়া আমি মৰফলজি পিছত আকৌ ডিসকাস কৰিম ঠিক আছে so ultimately what we know whenever a name has been given according to polynomial nomenclature that name contains many sorts of informations together and the informations could be about the place where it grows how does the plant look like how does the flower look like how is the arrangement of the flowers etc etc umbellites or corymbes talks about a term called as inflorescence what is inflorescence দুটা টার্ম আছে ন এটা হল ফ্লাওয়ার এটা হল inflorescence আর ফ্লাওয়ারের ডিফারেন্স কি exactly এডাল পেডিসেলত এটা ফ্লাওয়ার that is considered as a single flower or solitary flower no বহুতবোৰ flowers at one stand that is called as inflorescence বা collection of flowers right আৰু collection of flowers আৰু আকৌ কি থাকে classification থাকে কেনেকে collect বা কেনেকে arrange হৈ আছে so umbel type of inflorescence corymb type of inflorescence আমি যেটা morphology কৰিম at that time will become clear so iman monot rakhibo nalage just to give an idea je polynomial name is always confusing and so it has not been accepted right next we come to trinomial nomenclature no trinomial nomenclature as the name suggests the name consists of how many parts 3 parts and what are the 3 parts normally binomial ki thake duta part thake no what are the 2 parts the genus name and the species name so yate ki thakibo third part and the third part of the name ki hobo subspecies or variety so naam eta likhiba naam tor logot tumi jodi tar subspecies to information ba naam to di dia ba variety tor upor to naam to di dia then the name will contain 3 parts and these 3 parts is called as trinomial nomenclature while talking about subspecies we need to remember subspecies is a term that is used only in case of animals or jetia naam dia tat ami ki thakibo subspecies to thakibo and variety is something that is considered only for plants right normally scientific name eta ki thakibo 2 parts no what are the 2 parts the genus name and the species name na or it is called as specific epithet ami pisot korim hetu bostu right kintu etu namot ki thakibo third part so question that has been asked is what is the third part of trinomial nomenclature a portion to important hoy right so third part consists of the subspecies in case of animals and variety in case of plants is the point understood right নৰ্মেলি এটা সাইন্টিফিক নামৰ দুটা পাৰ্ট থাকে এটা হল জেনাস নেম বা জেনেৰিক নেম আৰু এটা হল স্পেসিফিক নেম বা স্পেসিফিক এপিথেট ৰাইট সো যদি সেই দুটা থাকে তাক আমি কি বুলি কম বাইনমিয়াল আৰু যদি তাৰ ওপৰটো সাব স্পিচিস আৰু ভেৰাইটিটো দিয়া আছে তাক আমি কি বুলি কম ট্ৰাইনমিয়াল ৰাইট example corvus splendens tinta part ase corvus splendens is a scientific name of crow similarly we have gorilla tinta part ase no it is the scientific name of gorilla similarly in case of plant we can give the example of cabbage we have Brassica oleracea var capitata var indicates what the variety right Brassica oleracea var capitata is the scientific name of cabbage right similarly we have so many other names for corvus splendens corvus to whole generic name splendens to whole specific name but species name to or splendens to ki hoy subspecies right so tinta bostu consider kora hoise ekan tak ami ki boli koiso trinomial nomenclature boli koiso right plant